This was a scary time. 1948, it rained heavy in the White Horse, Welsh Mountain area. Heavy, 5 inches. That's the day Jason Kurt's barn was struck by lightning, and we see the smoke from where I grew up. I grew up in below Pequea Valley High School on the bend of the creek, but we're in Paradise Township. But my school was in Salisbury. The landlord told my dad, he said if it ever floods, he had bought sawmill lumber 2x8, and he had a fence post for the cows go out in the pasture from the field. He had the cables on the post and slide them in there. He said, I paid big money for them. He said, if flood comes, you pull them out. So it rained heavy and the creek come up fast as I ever saw it. We lived there all my life. And he come down there with his rubbers. He sent my brother Don and brother Eby out the lane to get the cows. It was at the end of the lane was a 5-acre pasture. And he come down there with these rubbers on. He saw how deep it was. He went back and got his knee boots. So the time he got back down, he took them off and rolled his pant legs up. He pulled one out and gave it to me, and I drug it up toward the house, gave me the second one. When he pulled the third one out, that post popped right out of the ground. That's how high the water was already. So, also at the same time, across the creek was Ferris Landis's cows. There was about 9 of them, they were leaning against the willow trees. They started to go up to the barn, but when they left the bank of the creek, the ground went down, and so then they came back. They weren't swimming. They come back there, and they were rocking back and forth, and then my dad said he started calling them, and 7 of them come over, swam across, and came right up to our barnyard, and 2 didn't make it. They were going down the stream. They went around the corner, and around the corner there was a Haldeman family, and the boy said, Dad, there's cows coming down the stream. And they had their head thrown back over their shoulder, and he called them, and they started to swim and swam right up his lane. And that was amazing. That was a scary time. So Dad put a steeple in the cow stable where the watermark was, and then during after the Agnes flood, I went back to see how high it was, and it was 4 inches below, and Ernie Lapp's son-in-law lived there, and he said, I don't know who put this here, and I told him what it was for, but the watermark then was about 4 inches below that. So that was a scary time.
Tell them about the hail. It hailed real much that day. In White Horse, they had a lot of hail.
Wow. See, I wasn't aware of that. We grew tobacco, but I don't remember, and that would have been devastating to a tobacco crop. Faye's going to tell us more about the house and wash day. Okay, Faye?
So you want me to do it?
Come on up.
One time? I don't know if I need this or not, but I'll use it. I only have a certain amount of time, so I'm going to talk fast. So you're going to have to listen fast. I will always treasure the memories I had and the experiences growing up by the Pequea. We would have been considered poor, but I didn't know it. We always had food to eat and clothes to wear. Since Artie asked me to share about the house and what went on there, I'll start by describing it. It was an old frame house without hot water or a bathroom.
Faye, you want to hold the microphone a little closer?
Okay, very good. Is that better? Yeah. Okay, all right. It was an old frame house without hot water or a bathroom. Water for cooking was carried from a cistern with a pump and trough to a water tank on the cook stove. The only heat beside the cook stove in the kitchen was a cold stove in the living room. The kitchen was too small for a table which would seat 11, 5 boys, 4 girls, and my parents. I was the middle child. In addition to the dining room, which had a sitting room at the far end, were 2 smaller rooms. The parlor, which was only used when we had company, and a second room which had a table, hutch, and china closet, which held Mother's good china. We called it the sewing room because that's what it was used for. Mother not only made our dresses, slips, and PJs, but there was an endless pile of mending that never ended. The stovepipe from the coal stove went through a little room upstairs, which was the baby's room. It was the only room upstairs which had any heat. In the winter, the other bedrooms were cold. Facing the creek was 2 bedrooms, which were the 4 girls' rooms. Our closet was 2 sets of orange crates with a rod between for hanging clothes behind a curtain made from a bed sheet. At the opposite end of the house was a bedroom with 2 double beds for my 4 brothers. They had a separate stairway. The playroom was next to the boys' room. Sunday was a day of worship, rest, and relaxation, with the only work being done was the cattle fed and the cows milked. Monday was always wash day. On Saturday afternoon, my 2 oldest brothers filled the big iron kettles in the open fireplace in the building we called the wash house. The water came from a pump outside, which also had a trough where we washed our feet before heading for bed in the summer. It took 8 buckets of water to fill each iron kettle. On Monday morning, on the way to the barn, Dad would start the wood fire under the kettles, and by the time family devotions and breakfast was over, the water was hot. Mother had the wash sorted into big piles. The wringer washer and rinse tubs were full of hot water, and in would go the homemade soap and white shirts and sheets. The last load were the dirty work clothes. By this time, the water was filthy. The washer was emptied, clean water was put in, and colored shirts and dresses were washed, ending with the towels. By noon, the wash lines were full and blowing in the breeze. When dry, the clothes that needed ironing were dampened and put in large plastic bags, which went into the refrigerator until the next day. As soon as we girls were old enough, we helped with the ironing, starting with Dad's red and blue hankies and ours made from worn-out dresses. Remember, there were no Kleenex back then, and if there were, we couldn't afford them. I remember that on Tuesday, when my sis Wheeze came home from school, she tackled ironing piles of shirts and feed-bag dresses. Since Monday was wash day, breakfast was simple: oatmeal and fried eggs, sunny side up. It took a lot of food at our home. In the winter, mush and puddings appeared at the breakfast table often. The mush was made from corn that Dad took to the mill and had ground, and the puddings were made from the pigs that Dad butchered. I hated the morning of hog butchering because I hated hearing the pigs squealing. But coming home from school in the afternoon was a pleasure because there was always a heart or kidneys that we could sample. Most of the meat was canned because we didn't have a freezer in the early days. We rented a locker at Gap. I think, if I'm correct, Art, you can correct me, I think one year Dad promised Mother that if the steers brought a certain figure at market, he would buy her a freezer. The steers were sold and Mother got her freezer. It took a lot of food. Mother planted a large garden. In addition to the regular vegetables, she also grew horseradish and turnips because Dad liked them. She often threw a turnip in with the potatoes, which she cooked almost every night for supper. I don't remember many casseroles because Dad was a meat and potato man. One of my chores was peeling a large crock of potatoes before I went to bed for supper the next day. Another job of mine was packing the school lunches. I will never forget the endless rows of bread on which was buttered and then homemade bologna added before they were closed and packed. With 4 brothers going to school and each taking 2 sandwiches, plus what we girls had, I soon tired of packing lunches. We learned to work young and had chores whether we liked it or not. I remember the summer I turned 12. My grandmother had a stroke, and my mother took turns with her 2 sisters taking care of her by the week. Since my older sister had a job, the cooking was left to me. 2 experiences from that summer stand out. One morning, I burned the oatmeal. Did you ever eat burned oatmeal? My mother often made pies for supper, and my brothers got hungry for pie. I often watched Mother make pie, so I decided to make pies. She never used a recipe for the crust, but I knew that she used flour, lard, and water. I added water until the dough was easy to roll. They looked beautiful coming from the oven. However, we could hardly cut through the crust. When my brothers complained about the hard crust, I can still hear my dad say, "Boys, you asked for pie. Faye made you pies, now eat them without complaint." Mother was very organized, and she put us to work according to our abilities. When it came time to harvest peas, she picked them and then made piles for each of us to shell according to our age, and we had to finish our pile before we could take a swim in the creek, which we could see from the porch. When cherry picking time came, even Dad helped pick and seed. I have a picture of him falling asleep while he was seeding cherries. Mother canned both sour cherries for pies and sweet cherries for dessert. Fruit was our main dessert at mealtime. Cookies were reserved for lunches. I don't remember how many quart of cherries she canned, but I know that we did about 200 quart of peaches and 300 quart of applesauce. We had 2 pear trees, and on good years we also had pears. Our household chores were also designated: cleaning, lawn mowing, and weeding the garden, in addition to the kitchen work. One person cleared the table, one washed the dishes, the third dried them, and the fourth swept the crumbs under the table. The floor was swept after every meal. In summer, we liked to play ball, and sometimes we went out to play while the dishes were still on the table. Mother had rules for that also. If the dishwasher was ready to wash dishes before the table was cleared, they only had to wash the ones that were used for preparing the food. The person who cleared the table washed the rest. It didn't take long for us to notice if someone was missing from the ball game. The creek was a favorite place to play in the hot summer. My brothers built a dam so we had deeper water to swim in. When we were small, we had to play below the dam where the water was only a couple inches deep. We felt we had graduated when Mother thought we were big enough to play above the dam. The creek water was actually quite clean. A nest of water snakes lived in the dam, and they would swim along with us. We knew they were harmless, so we weren't afraid of them. In the afternoon, after the boys were finished with their work in the field, they would change into their swimsuits, grab a washcloth and a bar of soap, and get rid of that field dirt. It was a certain soap, and I will let you guess what kind it was. Our work was to be done by Saturday noon. The afternoon was spent preparing for Sunday, taking baths, polishing shoes, and studying our Sunday school lessons. When we were small, Mother would fill a wooden tub, place it near the coal stove, and give us each our bath behind some kind of curtain she hung on chairs for privacy. As we got older, we took basins to our bedrooms or took a shower in the wash house using a bucket with a spigot on the bottom, which we hung up. The challenge was getting finished before the water got off. I was 17 before Dad and Mother bought a farm of their own with indoor plumbing. And then there were the times of sickness, and the doctor came to the house. When I was around 2, the doctor came for someone else. I was lying on the couch, and Mother asked the doctor to check me. I was lethargic. He rubbed his hand across my forehead and said, "Mother, this child has rickets." I still take vitamin D, and I'm outside a lot, but my D level stays low. Then there were measles. I remember one by one we came down, and the house was quarantined. Mother had she had 9 sick children at one time. The older boys were upstairs, and the rest of us were in the parlor, on a chair, in the crib, a sofa. Somehow or other, she got us all in there. Even though she was so busy taking care of us, she would stop by the old Victrola, crank it up, and it would play 178 RPM record at a time. Our favorite song was, "You go to your church and I'll go to mine, but we'll all walk along together." Mother was a good mother and had dreams that were never fulfilled. I don't remember complaining about them. She wrote this poem in her later years. Do I have time to give it, Art? Yeah. Okay. What's my hobby? I like to grow things and dabble in the soil. I like to hammer things and make things or fix a toy. Recreate things, change things, see and smell things, sew things to make a happy girl or boy. Scrub and scour things to find the hidden alloy. Like the 2 big dolls I rescued before they reached the dump. I wasn't sure what I could do. They looked like a bit of junk. I scrubbed them, combed their hair, made slips and dresses, fixed them up. They looked most fair. They're enjoyed by many lasses. Or the go-kart and doll carriage. I found them in the dump. Put on a wheel here, new canvas there, and straightened them up a bit. Scrubbed them inside and out to make them nice and clean. Now they are pushed by our grandchildren all around the scene. Like the desk I bought for a dime, filthy, dirty, not much at which to look. I scrubbed it, rubbed it, fixed it, and varnished it. It turned out to be golden oak. Where'd the varnish come from? No, that's another story. A sale to which Dad and I went, we bought a lard can and contents for 10 cents more than 40. In it was 3/4 gallon spar varnish, Stanley creams and waxes, Windex brushes, and variety of paints to fix up all the scratches. Art and Joyce mailed me a card telling how they loved their mother. A coupon, good for 1-star rose, was drawn on the inside cover. Our pink dogwood, red maple, 2 weeping willows, and others, flags, tulips, and daffodils came from Wheezy, her sisters and brothers. I ripped them up and spread them out till all the ground is hidden. Folks remark, "How beautiful." I simply say, "They're from the children." My peony bed is quite a spread, the color quite a variety. White and pink and dark red, they all came from Aunt Mary. I have a corner in our backyard, which I call my propagation center. I like to try to grow things there. I'm sure it's not done in proper manner. Of all the rose slips that I have tried, I managed to grow a dozen. With roses, red, pink, and yellow, the bushes now are laden. My paracantha with a 4-foot spread, growing by the red rose harbor, grows berries by which the birds are fed. The slips I got from Aunt Barbara. I just love to take a stroll down in the meadow and watch the mallards on the pond, all playing there together. I have to sit real still so they forget I am there. Then the sheep come up and nibble on my ear. They're looking for the crackers which I carry in my pocket. The geese too are looking for their corn. They sure do make a racket. As I move on through the meadow, hearing the killdeer's plaintive cry, there's her nest with 3 eggs in it on the ground high and dry. I mosey on down through the marshes. The red-winged blackbirds make a fuss. I find her nest high in a tussock. Her 4 eggs look just like the dust. I love to travel quite a bit to other lands of wonder. I do this sitting in a shady nook, reading someone else's story. The Bible is most precious of all the books which I have read. Here I've learned of my wonderful Savior. It also tells me how to live. Living? This is my hobby, for I live just like a king, and all the precious things around me didn't cost me anything.
Thanks, Faye.
You're quite welcome.
My mother worked very, very hard. She passed at age 61. She contracted scleroderma. But our farm was bordered on the west by Ernie Lapp. He had a cider mill. We took apples there, and they crushed them into cider, and we had a barrel kept it in the basement, and when it turned to vinegar, we had vinegar probably for 2 years. And then on the south was, we called him Stacky Wall. It was later a Fisher farm. Then on the east was Rudder Skiles and Ferris Landis. And the creek was a big part of our entertainment during growing up years. We swam, fished, trapped muskrats. The most we ever got was 35 in 1 year. We sold them to Marvin Hershey came around. He was Dad's cousin, twice a week and picked them up. And now I lost my thought. That's all right. The creek flowed past our house. Between our house and Leroy Stolz's was an old stone dam that sent the water to a mill race that ran the old woolen factory. The next turn in the creek was the summer home of Diller Nickel family. He was assistant postmaster in Lancaster City, and we thought that was a fine summer home because we lived in a relatively old farmhouse, as did the other neighbors, but they would come out there in the summertime. The only remains of the woolen factory when we lived there was a big iron pipe coming out of the mud with a big wheel on top with teeth on it that run the mill. The rest of the arrangement was buried in the mud. It was the same type of water assortment that we had at Hess's Mill. I remember when I worked there when I was 18, the flour mill, Aaron Gaiman would come in the morning and start opening up that crank, and it slowly left the water in. The belts creaked, and he'd take a 2x4 and lean against it so it'd get going. But then when Ernie Lapp bought the farm, well, he had that all taken out. But I was told some of the buildings were used in some of the buildings on the farm. History tells us, and I brought some along, history tells us that Christian Hess built an old fulling mill in the northeast corner of Paradise Township. At first it turned out, in the peak, it turned out 400 quilts, 500 yards of carpet in a week. It was operated by various owners. It was shut down in 1912. I remember that field, and back then it would have been a good place to look for arrowheads because the creek went around, and then down there at Nichols it made another turn, and it was always told the Indians cleaned their animals and skimmed their water. And I know our neighbor has a spring there, and I forget how many arrowheads and axe blades and stuff he found in his garden. But, on the farm, we grew 9 acres of wheat, followed by 9 acres of clover. Dad would, spin the clover seed on in the spring. We had 5 acres of tobacco, 2 acres of potatoes, 15 acres of corn. And everything was on the halves. Half of corn went to Clark. It was Clark Electric's grandfather, Martin Clark. Half of the potatoes, income, half the tobacco, and half the corn, half the tobacco, and half the wheat. I forgot about the wheat. And the farm was old-fashioned. We bindered the wheat till I was about 14 or 15. Dad got a combine in, and we made loose hay. We rode the mule to pull the rope to bring the hay up in the mow. I think about how much we worked in the tobacco. I enjoyed stripping. I still help my cousin up in the manor to strip a day or two in the winter. Not very often. It's a good drive. It's 32 miles. But another thing I remember was he'd prepare the beds. They were 4 feet wide, and 2 of them. I don't know how long they were, but when the steam engine came, that was an exciting time because we never saw a big tractor like that. And he would toot the whistle when he left the neighbor's farm. Then he'd come to the end of the lane, he would toot it again. It was Benny King's uncle, I think, wasn't it, Ben?
My father.
Your father was Emmanuel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they steamed all night. That was a big deal. And I remember then when they were finished and we had breakfast, Mom left, she served the breakfast and we had applesauce. And well, growing up, we never had applesauce for breakfast, and I never forgot that. Dad would take a quart jar, put a tablespoon of water in, and then a tablespoon of tobacco seed. Then he would spin it in his hands, and they stuck to the sides, and he put them up above the cabinet. Every morning he would look at it, and when they started to get white, then he would know it was ready to seed. And he took a metal sprinkling can, he'd make the holes bigger with a nail, and we had a hand pump back along the we called it it was really beside the garden. It was out there on the field anyway, but we had a wooden barrel. We had to mud up the cracks to keep it from leaking. The first time that after we got that all stretched out, why it was ready to go. But he would take that and then fill the quart jar with water and put it in the sprinkling can, and he could sew those beds. So even as you would see, when the skipper wasn't real thick any place, but so then we had plants to pull, and sometimes we sold some. And Dad worked with the neighbors. They were Amish and we were English, but we had a team. And I remember we had a big corn box to put up on there with a seat, and we husked corn by hand, cut corn. I helped cut some, not a lot, but I was young. But I remember helping the neighbors when they filled silo. They told me to, on 2 rows, put 8 stalks down at a place. That was enough for a guy to put on his wagon. And Dad would take the corn box off the wagon and put these 3 logs on. They were sawmill logs, and then laid corn on there. And then also we had a flatbed then for hay. But we were the last English farmer in our area to get a tractor. We got a tractor, a BN, in 1943. And my cousin was there from Downingtown, Myron Hershey. It was Dad's brother Ross's boy. When school was out, he would ride over to Grandpappy Hershey's up at the New Holland Road where Grandpappy Hershey lived at 340. And then he'd ride over to our place. He was selling garden seeds. And George Byler, he was working for Huber's, and he brought it down on this truck. And back then you didn't have rollbacks and that, but he would back up to the tobacco shed hill and lay plank down. And he had a 1-bottom trailing plow, a 16-inch plow. Dad was so excited to get this. He hitched up the plow and he went around the barn, and Myron was standing on the drawbar. He made 3 circles celebrating his new tractor. It's amazing when you're getting something new and it replaces some of the other things you do by hand. It was exciting. Now the garden, and Dad had Mother had to dig the garden by hand. We had fence all around. The garden started a cement wall over by the cow stable, and it went down by the wash house, and then it went a little further, and then there was steps down there, and then it went on down to the edge of the yard, like a little estate. And he used to dig the garden by hand. He would dig 2 furrows, and then the landlord said, I want you to use pig manure in the garden and sheep manure in the asparagus. So that's how we did. And he'd get the neighbor to help. Clyde Skiles helped once in a while. And then along the walk, we had fence, and there was a raised bed about as wide as this, board that high, and there we raised carrots and radishes and red beets. And we were never to step on that because the ground was loose, and it was a really good time. But I'll tell you about I wanted to mention, the steps went down, and then we walked to school. We would go down around the creek, then over across from Leroy Stolz's barn, there was a footbridge. And it had a big concrete pillar on the Stolzfus side and a pillar in the middle, and some concrete on our side, but the 2 logs were placed there, and they went to the middle, and there the other 2 logs went to the other side. And they were bolted to the concrete on that side. On this side, they were bolted to the tree. And it had a rickety railing, and you know, it's amazing, none of us ever fell off, but in the wintertime it'd have some ice and snow on, but we crossed there and went up to school. But reading in the history of the area, the woolen mill people had wooden cottages up along the Newport where Pequea Valley School is, so they had to come down there to go to work. So that was interesting. And then I brought some of them along. I know if anyone's interested about the old woolen mill, here's some brochures. But I read the Paradise Township book. There was one for 200 years and one 200 years, and this mill is not listed in there unless I was blind. And I wanted to, I'm going to have a little more time once we move to Oxford. I'm going to have the scribbler, Mr. Brubaker, in the paper, see if he want to come out and see the area and give him some history and give him this brochure. And but I think the Agnes flood took that all down, I think. I think that's when the footlog was gone. Even the concrete pillars are gone. But oh yes, I got to tell this story. We had a pet cemetery in the thicket. And of course, we all went to Hershey Church, and at the end of the sermon, the closing, the deacon or the minister, he would go over the may God keep you faultless, keep you from falling, and went on. I can't say it now, but we would dig a hole, and us 3 boys, and put the pet in there, and then we always got a nice white flintstone, set there for the marker, and then put moss on. Then someone would say a Bible verse, and then we'd argue who's going to give the benediction. That was a big deal. That was the closing of the service. So a little bit about, I'd written a book. It would come out in 13, From the Farm to the House. And I was going to bring a half a dozen tonight. If anyone wanted one, it would be for sale for $15. And Leona wanted a few to keep here in case people came in and wanted one. But I had spent Marge Keene from Parksburg. She wrote for several newspapers. She interviewed me in 2008, my last year in office, 2 hours every Friday for 13 Fridays. And she sent it away to get typewritten. And I had repeated some stuff a lot. And I found out that she wanted to put all that in this book and be 400 pages or 350 pages. Then my wife and daughter-in-law condensed it into about 200 pages. But Leona will tell you doing a book is a lot of work. A lot of work. And God blessed me with a tremendous memory. And one of my friends said, I can't believe the detail you have in there. But I'm going to close like our county agent did. He would have, Bob Powers, he would have 10 minutes on WCOJ in the morning, one time a week. He would say, my time's up, thank you for yours. And Leona, she said, was there time for questions?
Yes. Art covered pretty much, but does anybody have any questions or any comments to add to what he was talking about? Somebody down here, yes, what can I, you need a microphone?
I was wondering where he found the literature or whatever on the old wooden mill.
He researched the, maybe it's not in here.
Your brother got it, didn't he?
My brother got it from the Lancaster Historical Society, and a lot of funerals you read in the paper, but these people that want to check on families, that's in the obituaries since papers were printed. But my brother got this out of the Historical Society.
Do you have more than one copy?
No, I
have one.
got 5 or 6 here.
Okay, because we need one for our Historical Society.
There's yours, you bet.
Thank you. And I think we're very lucky to have Bob here to be recording this. Bob Buzzard in the back is recording this program, and it will be in our archives now for future viewing. And thank you very much. Anybody else? Any other questions? Yes, Lois.
What kind of tractor did your dad buy?
A Farmall BN.
Yes.
And on some cold mornings we had to crank it, and knew you had to be careful. Dad said, don't put your hand around the crank because it could kick back. Well, we were doing loose hay. My dad and I were on the wagon. It was second cutting because we get neighbors in for first cutting. And Evie didn't have much gas on, and he stalled the tractor, and he got off, put the crank in, and just did what he wasn't supposed to do. It kicked back and broke his wrist. Because I remember his hand was to the side about an inch. The skin wasn't bothered, but his hand was just hanging over here. So she took him up to intercourse, and they fixed him up. And
Ron has a question.
Do you remember over here, the Pequea and the Norris being frozen over completely? Frozen over, so you could walk up the race to the other dam, or to what we call the...
I didn't get the question.
He said, do you remember when hearing about the Pequea freezing?
The Pequea being
Oh, yes. We skated. We skated at school, at New Milltown there, and we skated at home.
That's why I heard
And
28 years it has not...
yeah, and I remember the creek had some springs in it, and where they were was soft places on the ice when it was thawing. So we would shortcut. We'd come out to New Holland Road from the school, and then walk right down through the neighbor's field and into Ferris's meadow right across from our house. And one time I stepped in one of these salt places, and down I went. I got in water about up to here, but it was near the house, and we'd lay down on the ice and crawl out. Yeah, well, It hasn't frozen for quite a while. And we sledded in the wintertime. We sledded on Hershey Church Road. We even sledded on New Holland Road. But we would always have someone down by the corner watching for traffic. Yes?
I'm curious what you kept as pets that you ended up putting in the pet cemetery.
What did you?
We had a dog named Doodles. It was sort of a hound. And we buried some cats. We never had big dogs. My dad liked to eat beagles, and I liked beagles, and we used them to hunt rabbits. But I was raising some at home, and I'd let them run in the fall. When I was milking, I'd hear them chasing rabbits up in the cornfield. But trouble is with the beagle, if it's out on the road or along the road, a car come along and open the door and call them, they'll hop right in. And we had one hit on the road, and we lost several that way. So I didn't have time to tend them anymore. It was getting bigger than the cows. But we were, like Faye said, we were poor, but we didn't know it. And that's good. And we all had chores to do. And it was interesting, he would give us time off in the afternoon and say we could go swimming, and Mother had chores. Not every time, but she'd say, idle time is a devil's workplace. So she kept us. But another thing about the flood, it collected a lot of firewood for the kettle house. We'd bring sticks in 15 feet long and lay them in next to the fireplace, and then Dad would light the fire, and then as it burnt, we'd feed them in. I don't know where we got all the wood. We had a 2-acre, we call it the thicket, but I remember we used to cut wood with the 2-hand saw. He said, now your job's just to pull. Don't hang on, because I'll pull my way. You just pull your way. We'd try to push back, and then he got a bandsaw mounted on the BN, and he did work for the neighbors. He said he had to watch cutting fence posts because of nails and steeples, but he never charged much, and he went, I think, $1.50 an hour, and then he went to Young Company over there at Rough and Tumble, get the saw sharpened. I think it cost $5 to get it sharpened. But anyway, he was there from 1936 till 58. Then he bought his place at Cochran. He was 48 years old. Mother wanted a place sooner because of the help we had. We could handle a bigger herd, but he said things cost too much. But anyway, our background was good.
Another question?
Yes.
Tell me, what year did your father start hauling cattle?
Good question. He got his cattle truck before I got my car. I got my car in 1955, and I think it was a 54 Chevy cattle truck. And he joined the vintage sale barn through Bill Beam, and then he was treasurer of the company, and then he run the scales. Back then, they brought the cattle in the scales, and then it showed so much, and had a card there, and he'd write down the weight, and then write down the buyer, and then they would get a half a dozen. He'd have a wash line there with a clip on, put them in there, and then run it in the office. But going to the sale barn, that was sort of his release. He went to New Holland and helped sort calves over there, but he didn't have interest in going along to the mountains. We took him to our camp one time, then we asked him when to go again. He said it was up there. Now, if you would have said, well, there's a sale at a certain town, he would have went. He enjoyed the auctions and seeing what stuff we're bringing. But he was timid. He had a cattle truck, and he'd go to farm sales. He said, there was a bull sold there today. I believe I could have made some money on. So he knew what it was paid for. Then when we went to vintage, it would be like $50 more, but he never took the risk. He could have been a little bit of a dealer, but no, he played it safe.
Another question?
Anything else?
Anything else? Oh, here's one.
What do they do with the muskrats? I'm just curious.
Well, it was made into coats, furs. And believe it or not, George Listler worked there where they skin them. He worked for John Ivy along State Road, and they had a barrel. They would skin them and then gut them and skin them, and then cut the feet off and the tail, and put them in the brine, and they'd go to Baltimore for meat. The black people liked muskrats. And another thing we did at home, we caught pigeons. And Ernie Lapp, he had a market right in Coatesville, and he had a market for these squabs, and they wanted them, when you lifted the wing up, they wanted to see a little fuzz. They didn't want to see full feathered, because they thought that was an old pigeon. Yes?
You do your own skinning at home, skinning muskrats, or you just send them?
I never did. We let Marvin do it. I skinned rabbits for meat and squirrel, but never the muskrats.
Anybody else? Well, thank you very much, and thank you, both Art and Faye. This is very interesting.
I hope it was.
Oh, it was.
I
Yes.
was happy to do it. Thank you.